So welcome to the session. How's the conference so far? Good? Okay, good. I'm so happy to see so many people here. I mean, you guys can spread out, kind of like at the airport, lay down on the seats, get comfortable. We have so much room. It's kind of great, right? It's really cool. I'm actually really excited to be here. It's my first time being at the Samsung Dev Conference, so it's really exciting for me. I'm here to talk about the Microsoft Graph. Now, I'm a software engineer at Microsoft working on and focusing on Microsoft Graph. And one of the things that I do is kind of help developers figure out what they can do with the graph and kind of envision some of the experiences that you can do with some of the information that is in the Microsoft Graph. So my goal for today is to kind of just give you a big overview of what is Microsoft Graph, just so you have an understanding. So when you go home and your kids ask you, hey, Mom, Dad, what'd you learn? Microsoft Graph, and here's why. You'll also learn about Microsoft authentication. What does it take to authenticate users with Azure Active Directory so they can authenticate and start using Microsoft Graph? And then how you can build Android applications that take advantage of Microsoft Graph. I'm a Microsoft developer. It doesn't mean that I don't get to work with other tech. So this is an opportunity for me to expand my reach as well. Now, when we talk about Microsoft Graph, we're talking about Microsoft 365, which is kind of our umbrella for Office 365, Windows 10, and what we call the Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite, which includes things such as Active Directory and Intune. And we call it the productivity platform, which encompasses everything from your personal accounts that you do things like on Xbox and Skype, all the way up to enterprise accounts and educational accounts that you might use in your organization with all of these different services. And through a partnership we've had with Samsung, you can see a lot of these Microsoft 365 experiences that extend into also the Samsung ecosystem. For example, if you drop down in a Note 10, for example, if you drop down to the quick actions, you see an option to link to Windows. What this does is actually pairs your phone to your Windows machine, so that way you can use the Your Phone application and you can see all your messages, you can see all your pictures that you have on the device, you can respond to messages directly with your keyboard and mouse, you can see your screen on your phone, even if it's in your pocket, you can still interact with all your apps directly on your PC, even make phone calls and things like that. And then there's also a lot of the Microsoft 365 experiences that they're built into a lot of the Samsung services. You can get access to Outlook, Word, Excel, PowerPoint directly onto your Samsung devices. And later this year, you'll also be able to sync all of your photos from the Gallery application directly with OneDrive and kind of get access to all of that security and beauty that's built into the OneDrive cloud. Now, when we talk about Microsoft 365, it's all powered with the Microsoft Graph. All of these experiences are done through the Microsoft Graph. And underneath all of that exists this one unified API that allows you to access all this information, things such as people, documents, events, messages, activities, and much, much, much more. All of our first-party experiences, things such as Outlook and OneDrive and Planner, and on Windows, things like activities and notifications or Azure Active Directory, it's all built and exposes data through the Microsoft Graph. So when developers come in and they want to use this, they can use this one unified API to access things such as mail and calendar from Outlook, or access sites and lists from SharePoint, access messages that are in Teams, or tasks from Microsoft to do, and much, much more. Now, when you start making requests to the Microsoft Graph, the way we think about this is in a user-centric kind of world. When we think of user, we think of a person. So when you build these experiences, you build them in a way that they come with the user wherever they are. You build them on a phone or a PC. You can build them for a fridge. It brings the experiences with the user. When we make these requests, you make them on the behalf of the user to access their files, to access the files the user most recently worked on, to access their email, to access the data, the messages, the emails the user worked on. It all comes from the user and kind of spreads out away from the user. So one of the best ways to actually learn about this, and I'm going to jump into some code. If you're sitting all the way in the back, I encourage you to come forward. I'm going to show you some code. It might be easier to read if you're in the front seats. There's plenty of room. And again, you can lay down if you want, and you'll still be very comfortable. OK, so one of the best ways to learn about Microsoft Graph is through a tool we call the Microsoft Graph Explorer. This is essentially a REST client that allows you to interact with a lot of the data and just to make requests to the Graph API and see what data comes back. So for example, you can see here in the text box, I'm trying to access graph.microsoft.com/v1.0/me. So any request you make to the graph is going to go to this endpoint. It's going to be off v1.0 or maybe beta endpoint, and then you do me/whatever you want to access. If you just try to get access to me, you'll get some data directly in JSON format. So things such as name, job title, mail, etc. Now here I'm using some fake data, so I'm going to actually sign in. So you can sign in with your own personal account if you want, or you can sign in with your enterprise account to kind of test out and get real data. So I already have a demo account I'm going to use for this. It's my outlook.com. So now when I run this query, it's going to get data about myself, right? It's going to get data from my account. And then I can start playing around with this and see what else I can do. For example, if I want to get all my emails, there they are. They're really easy to use, and they're in JSON format. Or if I want to see some other things, for example, I can open up these samples here. And this is just a subset of all the things you can do with the graph. It's not everything, but it's just an idea of what is the things you can do here. So I've enabled the samples for mail, for calendar, for OneDrive. If I want to enable Excel, I can access data such as sheets and cells directly into Excel, directly through this API, in the same way I'm doing everything else. So for example, if I want to access, let's say, my recent files, I simply go to me/drive/recent and get you all the files. Now, this demo account doesn't have any files, but if you did, you would actually see all those files in there as well. Now, it's not just about getting data, it's also about writing to the graph. So there's actually a really fun demo that I can do here. Here's my outlook.com. I just logged in with my demo account. I mean, you can look at my inbox, but it's demo account. There's nothing in there. But I actually want to show you how you can actually create new messages really quickly. So I'm going to snap this really quick here. So I have the Graph Explorer on one side, on the left side, and then I have my Outlook on the right side. So when I try to actually say I'm going to go to messages, let me zoom out of this a bit so you can see it all. I'm in messages, and let's say I want to create a new message. What I can simply do, I can actually change this from a GET request to a POST request. And I can just post an object here. So for example, I want to create a new email with the subject, hello SDC. That's it. If I run this query, you'll see it immediately shows up inside of my inbox. I just posted a simple JSON object with just a subject. It created this email for me. It has all the details. Let me see if I can zoom in. So you can see it has all details, gives me an ID that I can now use to interact with this message. So I can just select this message. And then I can just say, OK, I want to change this message. I'm going to add the ID to the request. I'm going to patch this request. This is going to be a patch request. I'm going to say this to, I don't know, buy SDC. That's not how you spell buy SDC. And then run, and then it will change you can see here it changed the subject for me immediately. And then just for fun, I can actually just delete this. And you can see it's super easy to kind of make these requests to do anything that you can do with data inside of Microsoft Cloud. Now, for the rest of the session, I'm going to show you how to actually build a lot of these, use this data to kind of build applications in Android. I want to show you a quick application that my team built. It's all around working with meetings. Now, we're not going to build this application today because our scope here is not building Android applications, but I'll give you the recipe of what it takes to build these type of applications. How do you authenticate users? How do you get data from the graph using Android applications? But anyway, going back to our application, let me go ahead and unlock here. So for example, here's my calendar for today. You can see here I had some breakfast this morning. Here's the session we're in right now, and then I have a flight back to Seattle this afternoon. Now, one of the things that happen in Microsoft is we have a lot of meetings. And there are times where meetings are across many different buildings. I'm in building 109. I might have a building in building 4, and it takes time to get from meeting to meeting. However, there are people, I'm not going to name names, who tend to put meetings in between my travel time. So I have no time to get between meeting to meeting. So I thought, what if we can actually take a look at our meetings, look at where they are, figure out how much time it takes to get there, and actually just fix my calendar and put blocks there that people can't actually put calendar data in there. So we built that application. I'm going to actually install it on my machine right here. On my phone, I have a Galaxy Note 10 right here next to me. I'm going to show you what that looks like. So, and as Microsoft, we like to name things really descriptively. This app is called Microsoft Graph Calendar Meeting Fixer Pro Edition 2019. Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and sign in, and this is going to open up the browser. You see I already have an account that I'm already signed in to a different application, so I'm going to just select my demo account, sign in. It's going to grab my meetings for the day and say, hey, you have 3 meetings. Here they are. Do you want to fix these meetings? And there's a button in there that says Organize My Calendar. Now, let me put this side by side with this, and you can see what happens here. Now I can actually press Organize My Calendar, hit OK, and this is going to immediately figure out, hey, here's how much time it's going to take you to get from meeting to meeting, how much it's going to take you to the airport, and it's going to immediately add those into your calendar. So you can see here my calendar automatically updated instantly with all those meeting times. And this was all done through the Microsoft Graph. So I want to show you how you can build experiences like this yourself in 3 very easy steps. First, I'm going to show you how to register an application with the Microsoft Identity Platform to be able to authenticate users. Then I'll show you how to use this application to authenticate users with your Android application using the MCell libraries. And finally, how to call Microsoft Graph APIs once you have the right access tokens to call into the Microsoft Graph. So first, the Microsoft Identity Platform. Before you can even access data inside of the Microsoft Graph, you need to have a user. And a user needs to give you permissions to access their data. And the way to do that is through tokens, access tokens. So as the foundation for the Microsoft Graph is the Microsoft Identity Platform, which allows you to authenticate any users, whether for personal life or their enterprise, and allows you to, it's something that we use internally ourselves in Microsoft for first party, and something that all our partners use to authenticate users. And this is the evolution of Azure Active Directory, what we call the Microsoft Identity Platform. And the best way to actually create applications is to go to the Azure portal. You can just search online for Azure portal, or if you remember aad.portal.azure.com, that will take you directly into the Azure Active Directory options where you can actually log in with any Microsoft account and start creating applications. So let me show you how to do that really quickly inside of the portal here. So I'm here right here in the portal. I just went to aad.portal.azure.com and took me directly into this page. You can click to Azure Active Directory here on the side, and then if you click on App Registrations here in the options, you can see it right there. This will allow you to create new Microsoft Identity applications. I've already created a couple this morning. I'm going to create a new one just for this demo. I'm going to call it, SDC Demo. And then I have options to choose what kind of accounts I want to support. The options here are whether I want to support only enterprise accounts, or if I want to support both personal accounts and enterprise accounts. And in this case, I want to support both. And the beauty of the graph is that it doesn't matter what kind of account you use the exact same API to access data from both types of accounts. So here we're going to support both types of accounts. And we're not actually going to select what kind of application just yet. We're going to register this application, which is going to give us a client ID, which we can use inside of our Android application, which is right there. That's our client ID that we can use here. Now, I can also do things such as update my name. I can change my logo. I can provide my URLs for my service. This way, when the user logs in, they can get to see my name, and they know they can trust me, and they can give me permissions to use their data on their behalf. So that's it. We're done. We've already created applications, and we're good to go to create to start authenticating users. Now, in order to start authenticating users, we actually have a set of libraries we call MCell. MCell stands for the Microsoft Authentication Library. And we have a library for almost any language out there that we've created. And it's a way for you to authenticate users and to get the right tokens that you need for applications using all the right policies and all the best practices that you need to kind of follow all the OAuth path and everything that you need to do there. And today we're going to use the Android SDK library, which just recently became generally available, and it's at 1.0 version right now. Now, before we get into what it takes to authenticate inside of Android app, I kind of want to just go through the OAuth flow with you, just so you have an understanding of how tokens work and what you need to do to actually access the Microsoft Graph with these tokens. So when your app wants to access, let's say, /me endpoint to get the details for the user, it's going to go to the Microsoft Graph user API, the graph.microsoft.com/v1.0/me, right? But because you're not authenticated, it's going to get access denied. You need an access token to be able to access that API. The way to do that, you actually go to Azure Active Directory and say, hey, I want to authenticate a user. Can you help me sign this user in and give me an access token for this user? And Azure Active Directory will open up a new browser. We'll create a private conversation with the user, so you as a developer don't see what this conversation is. The user then puts in the username and password into the browser. If they have multi-factor authentication, they will sign in with multi-factor. Azure Active Directory might need some more details, like calling their grandma to make sure that this user can sign in. Whatever Azure Active Directory does to make sure that the user is who they say they are. Once the user has signed in to Azure Active Directory, that will place a cookie in the browser. And what this allows you to do, this is the core of single sign-on. If I've already signed in my browser on my phone once, I don't have to sign in again on other devices. So you saw when I first installed that application just earlier, I didn't have to actually enter my username and password. I just clicked on my account because I already signed in before, and that's how that works. And now, once the user signs in, Azure Active Directory sends me an ID token. The ID token is exactly what it sounds like. It's for you to identify the user. It's a JWT, or a JSON web token, which includes some standard claims, but also includes details such as who the user is, their name, includes their email, just basic stuff about the user. But we also get an access token. And an access token is actually what you need to access the graph and get details from the graph. This is not something that you actually need to open up or actually inspect. This is not for you to kind of use. It's for you to pass along to the graph. It's all encrypted, and it's not usable for you. But when you have this, then you can actually attach it to every request you make to the Microsoft Graph. And this can be decoded by the server at the Microsoft Graph side. And you can say, OK, I know who the user is you're trying to access. I know the user gave you access to these permissions. And I can return back the data that you're looking for. So let me show you how that works with Android. So here we are. We're back into our Azure portal. The best way to get started, actually, through the Azure portal is through what we have these quick starts here right at the top. If you click on quick starts, you'll see we have different languages you can start with on different platforms. So for example, if you want to get started with JavaScript or ASP.NET for our websites, or you can get started with native development. In this case, we want to do Android. And this goes through everything I just went through. It shows you how the access tokens and ID tokens work and how you can get those. But it also allows you to configure your applications to support Android or whatever platform you want to support with this application. So for example, I can just ask it to make these changes for me. It's going to ask me what my package name for my application is and what's the hash. And if you're not familiar with hashes, you can actually generate them through this tool it gives you here, whether you're on Mac or Windows. You can just get the development hash you have on your device. In this case, I've already downloaded the sample code that they give me in this quick start. I actually have it already running right here. I can just simply get the package name from there, just com.azuresamples.msl Android app, and then I already have a hash that I've generated before ahead of time. Just place that in there. And this will go in and make all the necessary updates, create all the redirect URIs, and set up my application to be used with my Android applications immediately. And then it generates these two configs. I'm already using the sample code, so I already have the app, the Android Studio open. So all I have to do is just kind of copy this code inside of there, and it will work for me. I already have everything. I just need the client ID. So let's go ahead and back in here. And go to my config file and just paste that in there. Zoom in so you can see it. There it is. That's the same config file. And then it also has this activity I need to add into my manifest. And this activity is actually when the browser opens up, is the browser activity so the user can actually sign in. So I can just copy and paste this. And this is, because I'm using the same machine as before, I already have that set up. So it didn't paste anything because it's the same thing. So that's it. Now I can actually run my application. And what this application does is just a simple button, asks the user to sign in, and then just calls into the me endpoint on the graph. So while that's executing, let me show you my phone here I have on the side. Let's go back here. There it is. So you can see here it just says call Microsoft Graph. If I press that button, it's going to open up that browser. It's going to ask me to sign in. I've already signed in. You can see my account there. It says, hey, this user already signed in. You can use this here. Or you can use a different account if you want. And then I sign in, and it asks me, hey, this application, the SDC demo that I created just now, wants to read your profile. Do you want to approve this application in your profile? And then you say, yes, I trust this application. I'm going to approve it. And this will initiate the call to Azure Active Directory to give me that ID token and access token, which I can then use to get data from the Microsoft Graph. And here I'm just pasting the JSON. This is the sample you get directly from the quick starts. Now let's go to the code real quickly and show you how this looks like. A bit of the setup. You can see here a field called scopes. This is actually where you get the permissions that you want to ask for from the Azure Active Directory. I want to ask for the user.read permission. This allows me to get data from the me endpoint. And then also, I have the graph URL I want to reach out to. This is the same one you saw that I used inside of the Graph Explorer. Now that I have these, now that I can start using the libraries, the MCell libraries. If you look at my configuration here, you can see here I am using the 1.0 MCell library directly inside of my app configuration. I'm also using Volley, which is a helper library to help me make HTTP requests as well. And now once I have that set up and I can use it, now I can actually create my first MCell application. So I use the public client application API and to create a single account public client application. Again, going back, we're very descriptive with our names. To create an application, and I pass in that auth config that got passed to me from Azure, this file that Azure gave me. So I'm just passing that over. And this is going to create an application that I can then use to start authenticating users. Once that application is loaded, then I can try to get an account. If the user is already signed in, this is going to get a cached account that I can use, and that way I don't have to ask the user to sign in again. The user is going to be signed in the next time they open the application. If that's successful, if I can actually get an account, then let's open this up. Here it is. Then I can actually get a token and start using that token. And we'll see what we can do with that token once we get that. If there is no account on the device, then the user has to press that button to sign in. And then we simply call the sign in method on the application. We say, hey, the user wants to sign in. Let's go ahead and sign the user in with these scopes, the user.read scopes. So that way, when the user gets prompted to approve, they get, OK, I want to read the user's details. Now, once the user signs in, we get our tokens. So we get this auth result. This auth result actually contains that token. You can see here we're calling the Graph API. And inside of the Graph API, we can use that object to get that access token. So this is just that string, that token that we got that we can pass on as a header. So for the rest of this method, we're simply just making a GET request. I'm using Volley as a helper here to make that request. You can see here we're making a GET request to that MS Graph URL, that v1.0/me endpoint. And we're also adding some headers here. Let's look at the headers. And this is where we're adding that auth result, that access token. We're adding it as an authorization header. So that way when we make that request to the v1 endpoint for the me/me, and we attach the authorization, then we can start getting results because we have that access token. That's it. And when we get the data, then we simply just take that JSON and we put it inside of our application. So it's very easy to kind of get started and start using this. So you saw how you can actually authenticate users, and you saw how you can actually reach to the Microsoft Graph and start getting data. But when you start looking at how to do it through Volley and start getting JSON, it gets kind of complicated on some devices. So for that purpose, we started creating some libraries. But before we get to that, I want to touch a bit about permissions. You saw the permission that the user that I got asking me to say, hey, do you allow this application to use this specific resource. The way this works is we pass a scope every time we want to get a token from the Microsoft Azure Active Directory, and the user gets the permission to approve. It looks exactly like this. So we call both scopes and permissions, they're the same thing. We use them interchangeably. So you'll see in the documentation, a lot of times we refer to scopes and we refer to permissions. So I just want to make sure that you're aware that those are exactly the same thing. And the best way to know what permissions you need or what scopes you need when you want to use the Microsoft Graph is just to go to the documentation. When you go to a specific documentation, you'll see this section that says permissions. And you can see here there's two different types of permissions. There's delegate permissions and there's application permissions. Delegate permissions are essentially permissions that the user gives you to access their data on their behalf. They approve this permission just by clicking yes, I approve the user to access my emails. I approve them to use my calendar. And then from that point on, you access that information as if you were the user. Application permissions, on the other hand, are used by applications that run in the background, for example, or they run somewhere on the server. They access data on behalf of, they access data on multiple users. And these applications have to be approved by administrator in your organization. And they can be used for things such as spinning up new services or receiving messages from the graph and handling things and maintaining things that are running inside your organization. But this is the best way for you to kind of understand what kind of permissions I need and what kind of scopes I need to ask for from the Azure Active Directory service to be able to access the data that I need, whether it's for messages, whether it's for files, whatever it is, that's the scope that I want to ask. Now let's take a look at how we can actually use the Microsoft Graph SDKs to get data from the Microsoft Graph. And we create SDKs for a lot of languages that you can use inside your applications in a very fluid and typed way. You don't have to work with JSON data. You don't have to convert it into your own types. You can simply, with a few lines of code, just get the data from the graph and use it inside of your applications. And today I'm going to show you how to do that with our Java SDK, which works beautifully inside of Android. So let's take a look at that inside of our demo. So I'm going to switch to a different branch that I have for this. It's the same app, just on a different branch. Graph Basic. Oops. There we go. And for this, I'm using the Graph library. It's here. So I've added this inside of my app configuration. It's the Microsoft Graph 1.6 library, which allows me to access data inside of the graph in a very fluid way. And then inside of my main activity, let's minimize this. Everything else is the same. The only difference is these two functions, the create graph client and the call graph API. So here we're creating a new graph service client. And this is what we can use to start making calls to the Microsoft Graph. All it requires is an authentication provider. An authentication provider is essentially a class that helps the Graph SDK authenticate a request. So it attaches that header to each request. And usually you would create your own class and you would extend authentication provider to do that. For simplicity, I've done that directly in our main activity in Android. And the only thing you have to do here to implement this interface is implement this authentication request application method, which simply takes in a request and adds that authorization header and access token. So that way, every time you make a request to the graph, automatically adds that header for you. So then once you have this graph client, then you can start making calls to the Microsoft Graph. So now, once that I have that call, all those lines that I used with Volley before to make that request to me is all done with this one line of code where I can just say, give me data for .me, and that's it. You just get that. And then you say, and you get a user. This is actual object. It's not JSON data that you get. You get an actual type, a user type that you can then use inside of your application. In this case, I just passed that user inside of my update graph UI, and then I can use all the properties inside of that user in a typed way. So when I run this application now, it will not look any different, but it will have the exact same experience there as before, just in a much easier way to do that. So it's building, there it is, call Microsoft Graph, authenticate, and you can see here it just shows my name because I'm only using the display name. So it's very easy. So now that you've set this up, let me show you how we use this same thing inside of the application I showed you earlier in my session. So here's the code for that session. And for this one, for this code, in this one, we're actually using Kotlin. We're not using Java. And the beauty of all these libraries is you don't have to use just Java. You can also use Kotlin. So it doesn't matter what language you use to build your Android applications. All these libraries work the exact same way. So most of the code is the same. I want to show you is how we grab events from the Microsoft Graph and then how we write those events back to the Microsoft Graph. Now, if you don't remember what that application is, just as a reminder, essentially shows my events. So let me go ahead and pull that up again. Here it is. Let me delete these so we can actually see it in action one more time. So I'm going to delete all these events that it added for me, the travel times. There it is. I'm going to refresh. One straggler. There it is. And then if I click organize, it will go ahead and write those events. So it grabs events from today, and then it writes back events based on the calculation that it does with the times and the locations. So how do we do this? So first, we call the Microsoft Graph API to get all the events. To do this, we first went to the Microsoft Graph Explorer and looked at what are the best ways to get events. So we looked at the Outlook calendar, and the first one I can look at is my events for the next week. I know it's a little small, so let me zoom in. And this is the API you use to get events for the user calendar. Here, for example, it's me/calendar view and requires a start date time and an end date time. And if I want to get even more details about this, I can actually go on this button, go to the documentation, and get what permissions I need to ask for the user. So I can use calendars.read, because that's what we need to access the calendar data. I can look at how the API looks like, and I can even look at how to actually make these calls with all the different languages. So you can even look at, hey, here's the code I need for Java to use the Graph SDK to use this directly inside of my application. So just copy and paste this, change the details that I need, and I'm good to go. So we do exactly the same thing here. For example, we create a start date, which is today at midnight this morning. We create an end date of midnight tonight, and we want to get me.calendarView with those two parameters, the start date and end date, and get back an event collection page. It's that easy to just make that request and get that data. Now that I have that data, and again, I just have some events, I can take those events, I can filter them even further. I'm only interested in events that have a location, I know where they are, and they're not happening all day, they have actually start and end date. And then I'm simply just rendering those events using just Android standard view models. And that's it. So it's really easy to do that. Now, how do we actually calculate the travel times, and how do we get that implemented? Well, it's very similar. For example, here, we use the same events that we had before, and we generate a distance matrix for each one. And distance matrix simply uses the Google distance matrix API to pass in just the locations of each event. We create a start and an end, and we just pass those arrays, and we get times of how much time it takes to get from one location to the other location, and just gets back the right information. So now we have that distance matrix. For each event that it's in our calendar for that day, we can create a new event. Right? We're not creating JSON here, we're creating an actual event type. This comes from the Microsoft Graph SDK. I create that event type, I add the subject, I add the body, I set up all the properties I need on this event, just as I would expect normally through a model. And then I create the start time, I calculate the travel time to calculate the end time. So I just set start and end time of that event. And then I simply do a post. I call graph.me.calendar.events, and then post that new event that I just created, which if you look at the Graph Explorer, it's the exact same API. It's me/calendar view, for events, is me events, and then I can post to get that information. Now, that was it. That's super easy to get started, and hopefully that actually made a lot of sense. So hopefully all of that showed you how to actually build application using the Microsoft Graph, how to authenticate those users to get tokens to access the Microsoft Graph, and how to actually use the Microsoft authentication libraries and the Microsoft Graph APIs to build applications for Android. The best way to get started with all of this is through the graph.microsoft.com website. If you go to graph.microsoft.com, you'll be able to get access to all the quick starts that we have. You can get access to documentation. The Graph Explorer is there. So everything that I talked about today is at one URL. So if you want to take a picture of this URL, this is the right time to do that right now and kind of review that later on. Also, we have a lab that's going on all day today, and I'll be there as well. So if you want to learn how to do this in person and kind of talk to me and kind of do it hand in hand with me, come to the expo hall that we have out there, and we have a 30-minute lab that will guide you through using MCell libraries, using the Microsoft Graph SDKs to get information such as calendar data, the exact same thing you saw me do today. I want to thank you for kind of hanging out here. If you have any questions, we have about a few minutes. You can come up and use the microphone, or you can find me here or at the expo hall to ask me those questions and kind of do the concerns. Thank you, and I can't wait to see what you build with this.